too.
So we're going to switch now to another extremely important topic, that of equality, diversity and inclusion. I know we've seen some of the updates that have come out over the past 18 months or so about the work that's been undertaken by both Sport England and UK Sport. And Trixie from UK Sport and Lindsay from Sport England are now going to provide us with an extra update on EDI work and work being undertaken to tackle racism and racial inequality in sport. Thank you very much.
And for those of you who can't tell us apart, I'm Trixie and this is Lindsay. I'm the ED&I advisor at UK Sport, so part of Rob Marini's team, the sporting system team, and you saw what ED&I fitted into the organisational health tool that he put up earlier. So my role is both internally focused, so working to ensure that UK Sport is the most inclusive and diverse organisation it can be, but also externally focused, so helping our partners who are grappling with the same issues that we are. And we're delighted to have been invited to talk to you today about how we're embedding ED&I in our organisational culture. And I'm also going to be sharing some information about a project that we're working on around racial inequality. So by way of context, this is the challenge that we're facing. We sent brilliant teams to Tokyo and to Beijing, but neither the teams nor the huge workforce behind them, the psychs, the physios, the performance directors, the coaches, were representative of the rich diversity of UK society. And why does that matter? Well, it means there's untapped talent that doesn't feel welcome in our system or which we've excluded. And this matters both on moral grounds with publicly funded bodies and also from a performance perspective. And that's particularly important when we're in the business of chasing those marginal gains. You can see that when we did the last board demographic survey with Perrott Laver, we saw some welcome improvements in terms of the characteristics of members on sports boards. But there are still some significant gaps to close. The new requirements in the code are designed to help bring about a step change in our own and our funded partners' efforts to tackle this underrepresentation. The code now requires us to publish clear ambitions to ensure that not only our boards, but now also our senior leadership teams and our wider workforces, so cascading down the organisations, are reflected of UK society, the diversity of UK society in all its forms. We previously had DAPs, Diversity Action Plans. We're now calling them DIAPs, or some people are calling them DIAPs. Apologies, we haven't reached a consensus yet on how to pronounce that acronym, but we'll get there. And the inclusion piece is important because we can get all the diversity we like into our organisations, but if they're not inclusive, if those different people don't feel welcome, they don't feel like they belonged, they don't feel that their voices are going to be heard or they can add value, then they're not going to stay. We'll have that revolving door syndrome and we'll lose them. So the Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan are, we hope, the tools to effect meaningful change. The old DIAPs in some organisations, and full disclosure here, including UK Sport, seemed very much to be almost a tick-boxing exercise, possibly to secure funding, but they were not used on a daily basis to drive change. And we're really seeking to change that. So once those DIAPs are agreed by UK Sport or by Sport England, whoever your funding partner is, they have to be published on your website, which will help with accountability and transparency, and they have to be formally reviewed on at least an annual basis. They are dynamic documents, so internally you're probably going to be reviewing them more regularly than that, but at least a formal annual review by the board. We know this work is challenging, and those of you who are on the front line of trying to deliver ED&I change in your organisations sometimes feel like you're pushing treacle uphill, and if it was easy, would have done it right by now. We know that it's no longer a question of BAU, but we need to make big muscle movements in this area if we're going to shift the dial. So the same messages you've been hearing earlier about sustainability and on the people plans, we can't just do the same things that we've always been doing. Otherwise, guess what? We're going to get the same results. So we've got to make some big changes here. Many of you have told us that you lack the capacity or the expertise to do this on your own. We know some of you are wearing multiple hats. You might have the ED&I brief in your organisation, but you've always also got the safeguarding, the marketing, the integrity, sweeping out the change rooms at the end of the day. So we're putting together a support package to help you with that. And it's going to be a package which will be in place for at least 2 years. It'll give you access to ED&I experts, independent ED&I experts, but also resources, webinars, communities of best practice to help you and guide you in collecting your quantitative and qualitative data about your organizations, so you know not only what you look like, but what you feel like, to help you identify your gaps and priorities, so those fires closest to you that you need to fight, and to support you to devise initiatives and actions to close those gaps. Both of our organisations are subject to the code. We both need to be code compliant. We've both got DIAPs. They've been up on our websites for a year now, so we're coming up to that formal refresh stage. In fact, in UK Sport, that's happening at the board in December. And we're about to start testing with a couple of other early adopters the new support package we're rolling out. So we'll be using it ourselves in earnest and hopefully helping iron out any wrinkles that there might be in there. And the intention is that then we'll be rolling it out, offering it out to partners in the new year. And there's roughly 130 sports organisations who will be required to complete a DIAP and will be receiving that support. You'll then have a year to produce your own DIAP, and they must be robust and ambitious, but meaningful to your organisation and achievable, recognising that we're all in different places on this journey. So one size doesn't fit all, and we're not looking for cut and paste DIAPs, something that really speaks to your organisation. Those who have already got DIAPs can go through the moderation process of this new support package, and that's a sort of a check and challenge process again with independent assessors who'll look at the progress you've made, just check that you're being ambitious enough and give you some pointers about other things you might consider. And then the last part of that formal process is that those moderated DIAPs are sent to UK Sport and Sport England for final approval. And after that, it's your opportunity to publish them on your website so that others in both the sporting sector and outside can see the kind of activities that we're driving to create greater inclusivity within our organisations. Last year, we launched UK Sport's 10-year strategy with a mission to create the greatest decade of extraordinary sporting moments, reaching, inspiring, and uniting the nation. That strategy is underpinned by 3 ambitions: to keep winning and win well, to grow a thriving sporting system, and to use the power and platform of sport to inspire positive change. Greater diversity within a more inclusive system is key to us achieving that, to help us find untapped talent and harness it, to reach new audiences, and to protect the future of our sports. That requires culture change. Culture change isn't easy, as any of you who've tried it will know. It can generate strong emotions, it can generate fierce resistance, and often it's literally a question of converting a single heart and mind at a time. So I'm going to share how we're tackling the problem, tackling the issue in UK sport. So this is our our organisational and governance framework for EDI in UK sport. So the blue boxes are our governance touch points, and the green boxes are groups which contribute to the plan. Our EDI strategy is embedded in our 10-year strategic plan, and EDI is a golden thread that runs right through it. So it's not something that sits outside our main work, but it's actually that we focus on when we've got time and resource, but something that runs through all of our activities, both internally and externally. At the top of the pile there, we've got the board. They set out and review the progress of our ED&I strategy. And as I've already mentioned, they review our DIOP on an annual basis. Of course, our board share responsibility for delivering this, but we have a very energetic board ED&I champion who certainly keeps me on my toes, who advocates for the importance of ED&I in the board, prompts and informs discussion at board level. On the next layer down, our senior leadership team checks and challenges implementation of our DIAP and our ED&I strategy every quarter and in great detail. The Deputy CEO is our overall SLT lead for EDI, and additionally, all of our directors are now champions, either for a protected characteristic or for a theme. And the characteristics and themes they've chosen to champion are gender, race, faith, disability, sexual orientation. The themes are socio-economic diversity, sometimes referred to as social mobility, and geographic diversity. And we look to them to role model the desired behaviours and values within our organisation, and to advocate both internally and externally for EDI, thereby underlining the importance of this agenda. Our ED&I working group meets monthly, and its purpose is to ensure the momentum on delivery of our ED&I strategy for the high-performance system. So it monitors progress against our KPIs and our risks, but it also stimulates new ED&I activity, going back to the fact that this is a dynamic space. We don't sit on our laurels. When we achieve something, we mark that success, but we move on. We have 2 representatives from every department sitting in this group, and you can see that within the 4 priorities listed there, the work of every team in our department is also captured in this ED&I strategy. So all of our staff individually can see where their roles contribute. It's no hiding place, basically. On priority 4, that's where our DIAP fits in. This is a tool which helps us drive our internal activity. It's informed by data. In fact, all of our strategy is informed by data, and that obviously gives us the opportunity to baseline where we're at now, but also to set some realistic ambitions or targets and help us measure the progress we're making and determine whether the initiatives we've put in place are the right ones or whether we need to rethink. Our DIAP is, as I said, it's on our website. It's got specific objectives with timeframes and with named senior responsible officers there to deliver against them. Our key overarching ambitions are that our people at every level of UK sport are reflective of UK society, that we talk and act confidently about inclusion, that our leaders are visible and passionate on inclusion, and that we foster an inclusive organisation, an inclusive culture across the organisation. On the bottom left, you'll see we've got an anti-racism group. So this group was established after George Floyd's murder, when organisations, ourselves included, were looking at what we were doing, particularly around racial inequality. It leads and inspires UK sport and, more widely, the high-performance system in positive action against racism, and that's principally through delivery of our TRARIS action plan. TRARIS is a Tackling Racism and Racial Inequality in Sport review, the 5 home country sports council sponsored, and I'll come back to talk about that in a little more detail. The ARG meets every 6 weeks, and it's chaired by our CEO, by Sally Munday. And that leaves colleagues in the organisation in no doubt about the importance we attach to this work. In the 2 years that it's been in existence, membership has tripled to 40 staff regularly, and that's about a quarter of our organisation, so that culture piece, that message is getting through. We start each of those meetings at staff request with a reflection on racist incidents that we've witnessed in the previous 6 weeks since the last meeting. And I'm sad to say we're never short of stories to consider. And they're not always sports related. So the last meeting was just after Disney trailed its new Little Mermaid teaser. And for those of you perhaps who don't have children at that age, the new principal character is now a mixed-raced mermaid. And within hours of that trailer going live, the vitriol on social media was just horrendous. So we consider things like that and the impact on our colleagues and our ethnically diverse colleagues and their families that might have. The Traris Implementation Group is a spin-off from the anti-racism group, and it also comprises representatives from each department, helping ensure that we pass an anti-racist lens over all of our activity, whether you're sitting in performance or in legal, finance, HR. And then we've got employee resource groups, sometimes referred to as affinity groups. These serve both as safe spaces for people with a shared identity or protected characteristic and for their allies, as well as internal consultancy groups to help foster a diverse and inclusive workplace and to improve our organisational innovation. And I'll just give you an example. These groups are very new. This structure has been evolving over 2 years, but the director champions were only appointed in the summer. The groups are still standing up now, but the LGBTQ+ group decided just last week that before the World Cup kicked off, they wanted all of our staff to have rainbow lanyards as a gesture of support for our LGBTQ+ community. And that's something that they organised and distributed with our performance director, who's the LGBTQ+ champions, support and budget. And then finally, I've got a little box there saying all staff. And I hope this is an indication of the way that culture is becoming embedded in our office. When we set up the Traris Implementation Group to look at how we needed to become a more anti-racist organisation, we ran departmental workshops, one for each department in our organisation, asking people to consider how they individually could help this agenda, but also in their role. And each of the 5 departments came up with the suggestion that we should have mandatory ED&I objectives in our performance appraisals. So this is not something that's been imposed on us by HR. Staff asked for this, and that was introduced in April. And then all of this is underpinned by regular communications in the organisation, so a constant drumbeat of communications about diversity, about difference. Because we were struggling with the language, people were fearful of saying the wrong thing, using the wrong terminology, inadvertently causing offence. So in our weekly all-staff newsletter, we have a column about inclusion. It's called Inclusion Matters, and we focus on all different aspects of diversity, whether it's neurodiversity, disability, sexual orientation, social mobility, to get our colleagues comfortable with the language, to understand the issues. If they can't speak the language, they can't start to address the issues. And our minimum requirement that we put on all of our staff is to be curious. Just be curious about difference. We're trying to change the dialogue from the fact that difference is something to be fearful of and to be accommodated, actually to something that's to be celebrated and to be encouraged and advanced. I mentioned I'd come back to Traris. The ED&I waterfront is broad, and we're working to address inequalities in all areas, but in UK sport, we're particularly doubling down on racial inequality. So in 2020, in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, the 5 Sports Council commissioned the Tackling Racism and Racial Inequality in Sport review. And it was to look at the racial inequalities in sport and help us better understand whether we as sports councils were doing enough to understand that context and tackle the issues involved. It comprised 2 parts. Firstly, a really extensive data analysis of the publicly available data on race and ethnicity in sport, together with a lived experiences research project in which over 300 people in around 36 sports across the UK, ranging from grassroots participants through to elite athletes and coaches, shared insights into their involvement in sports. And their stories are truly appalling. If you haven't read, there's just one anecdote there, but if you haven't read that Tell Your Story report, I really encourage you to do it. You can see the summary of the key findings here at the top there. And what's painted here is a picture of mistrust in institutions, in leaders, in practitioners of sport, objectification and othering of participants leading to long-lasting psychological damage and trauma, lost and diminished potential, again, talent we don't have in our system, the setting up of parallel and alternative segregated sports organisations which represent safe spaces for ethnically diverse communities. The key recommendations coming out of Traris were for us to improve our understanding of the impact of racism on the individual, to improve the experience of Black and Asian people in accessing and navigating sports structures, a need for organizations to improve their structures, practices, and representation, and then that allyship piece, developing allyship strategies to tackle the attitudes and actions of individuals within sports structures. We know there's no place for racism in sport or in society, and I defy anyone who wasn't not to have been moved by the awful and shocking revelations coming out of cricket. Sadly, we know that there are athletes in our Olympic and Paralympic sports too who are experiencing abuse and discrimination because of the colour of their skin. This is not acceptable, and we mustn't tolerate it any longer. No matter how difficult, disruptive, or uncomfortable, doing nothing is no longer an option. This work's urgent, and through Traris, we've acknowledged racism's damaging impact on individuals and communities, and we're seizing the opportunity to reimagine sport and what it might look like in future. In response to the Traris recommendations, the 5 sports council CEOs made some commitments relating to people. So who have we got in our organisations and in our associated sports institutes? Representation, what does the wider system look like? Who's accessing it and who's not able to get over those barriers, preventing them access it? Systems and structures, what is it about the way we're set up and that we operate that we are causing barriers for some people that they just can't get through? Insights, there is a lot of data out there, but is it in sufficient granular detail? So a Pakistani teenage girl's experience of trying to play sport is going to be very different to a middle-aged Afro-Caribbean man's experience. So really digging down into that detail. And investment, where are we spending our money? Who's getting our investment? Where do we procure our goods and services from? We're working individually and collectively to deliver solutions for real, lasting change and to earn trust, that point that Jeanette made this morning. The community has no trust in us. We need to earn their trust. And it's important that we don't do this to the community, but with the community. So we're co-creating solutions with a group of Traris stakeholders, so some of those brave individuals who shared their personal stories in that survey, and we seek their challenge on our efforts to date. As a collective, the 5 sports councils publish regular 6-monthly updates on our work. The next one's due in January. Please do look out for it on our websites and see if there's anything there that resonates with you that you might be able to adopt in your organisations. Within UK sport, our Traris work is fully embedded in our DIAP. To help pivot the system and to ensure transformational change happens within your organisation, we'd encourage you to do the same. Thank you for listening. I'm going to hand over to Lindsay, and we'll take some questions afterwards.
Thanks, Trixie. Lucky you, all of you today, you have 2 Sport England Lindsays for the price of 1. I'm Lindsay Games. I work in the EDI team and I'm head of equality. So fairly similar to Trixie's role, there's an element of internal stakeholder communication and collaboration, but a lot of the role is also externally facing as well. So today, I'm going to very briefly talk about Sport England as a whole and the work that we're doing. Then I'm going to look at a tangible tool that's currently in development that I think you might all be fairly interested in. And then I'm going to speak about a program that we've been delivering with a partner and give you some key takeaways for us all to consider about embedding EDI into organisational culture. So firstly, our 10-year strategy, Uniting the Movement, the foundation for everything that we do at Sport England. Now, internally, we have a fairly similar structure to UK sport. So if you think back to that slide of Trixie's with the breakdown of the boxes and the groups that feed into it, are fairly similar. But what is different is that overarching our work in Sport England on a grassroots basis is Uniting the Movement. We're all familiar, hopefully. I'm not going to labour this too much, but through Uniting the Movement, we believe that sport and physical activity has a massive role to play in improving the physical and mental health of the nation. We all know that. But we also know that for too long, people with the most to gain from being active have been the least able to take part. So as a result of the huge disruption that COVID has caused, and we've talked about it quite a lot today already, the inequalities that COVID reinforced or even exacerbated, such as those around socioeconomic status and ethnicity, our drive to do things differently and confront those inequalities head-on is stronger than ever. Uniting the Movement is different, not just because it's a vision for 10 years, which when we launched was fairly unusual for our sector, but it's unusual because it sets out how we need to change as an organisation and as a sector and as an ecosystem so that we can give people the opportunities they need now and in the future. More than anything, Uniting the Movement seeks to tackle the inequalities we've long seen in sport and physical activity. And we all know that. We work in the sector. We're embroiled in the work. Providing opportunities to people and communities that have traditionally been left behind and helping to remove the barriers to activity has never been more important. We are not solely defined by our characteristics, so our gender, our ethnicity, or income. But for too long, there have been clear patterns in the characteristics of people who feel less able to get active. So these inequalities are at the very core of Uniting the Movement, and we will have a laser focus on tackling them in all that we do, because providing opportunities to people and communities is vitally important. For Sport England to genuinely tackle those inequalities and facilitate the whole systems changes that Uniting the Movement sets out, we must be guided by our organisational values. And for those of you who are listening, when Jeanette did her keynote this morning, you'll remember, but I won't test you, they are collaborative, inclusive, ambitious, and innovative. We will be driven by those values, as well as our EDI principles in every aspect of our work. And exactly as Trixie laid out in UK Sport, it's no different in Sport England. Every individual at Sport England has a responsibility to help drive those EDI principles using our values as a tool, and we must all be intentionally inclusive. This should probably say EDI consultation and strategy. It's really important that Sport England, if we're going to tackle inequalities, that Sport England understands the current barriers and what these communities need and want, rather than us and my team making assumptions about them. By going through a community-led consultation, it will ensure that our strategic focus echoes the requirements of the sector and our colleagues. This consultation is currently in field at the moment. We will be undertaking this over the course of the next few weeks. And the output of that consultation, so listening to the sector of actual funded organisations and non-funded, so those that we do not have a relationship with, the output of that will be to create a 2-year EDI strategy in 2023 that will direct all of our work. The project obviously will add to the Traris work that Trixie's just outlined, the 2020 Sport for All report, the COVID insight and the cost of living insight that's on our website as well. So it's really planning to be complementary. And then finally, and Trixie spoke about the DIAP process quite a lot, so I'm not going to talk to you about the process behind that. But our EDI work in Sport England is intrinsically linked to Uniting the Movement, and the role that leadership will play in delivering our ambition is critical. So our DIAP, Sport England's DIAP, clearly sets out our ambitions as an organisation. It is on our website. It is downloadable. It makes us accountable and visible for the commitments that we are publicly making in this space. Those ambitions represent our internal objectives for ensuring EDI for the next 4 years, and it recognises the principles around those as set out in the code. So you can start to see that everything is starting to talk to each other. So our DIAP aims to be ambitious in changing behaviour and making progress. And it's focused on the delivery of 3 themes, which are our equality objectives we've identified as priorities over the next 4 years across our protected characteristics that we know of, all the while recognising intersectionality throughout, so not that we're defined by one of those characteristics. A quick summary, so you know what's important for us, but do go to the website, do download it, it's a brilliant read. The first one is leadership, creating and sponsoring a climate for change. The second is attracting, progressing and retaining diverse talent. And the third is wider change through employee engagement and learning. So it goes without saying that while we've prioritised these themes, we continue to support lots of other areas of work through Sport England that we've implemented through our wellbeing priorities and our own people plan as well. So, in my introduction, I promised that we'd talk about Sport England and then I'd look at a tangible tool for the sector that's in development. Some of you may be familiar with the equality standard for sport, easy for me to say. I wouldn't be surprised if you were. It's been around since 2004. It's led and co-owned by the Sports Council Equality Group, affectionately called SGA. We also lead on other key areas of equality focus across the UK sports councils, including the transgender inclusion in domestic sport guidance, which some of you I know are working through at the moment. Our new EDI strategy that I spoke about on the previous page will look to optimise the new version of this when it's launched. And I wanted to bring you really quickly up to speed on what that new version will look like and how it might impact some of your work in the future. So the old equality standard, like I said, was created in 2004. It had a very brief update in 2012, but actually nothing magnificent has changed within it since then. It's briefly a static framework of standards around EDI, and there's a requirement for organisations to meet the standard at a level that's appropriate for them. So at a tiered level, actually, that's appropriate. So foundation, preliminary, intermediate, advanced. If we fast forward to now, SGA contracted sports instructors, who I think most of us all know. They've been helping to review this, the equality standard, for the last couple of years, and Trixie and I are both part of that work. And we're nearing the end of our journey, and we're currently testing out the new operating model and framework with some key partners in the sector. It's a really interesting journey that we've gone on. And what we've actually discovered is that there's some elements of the old equality standard that we absolutely must retain, without a doubt. But there's also some elements that, because the EDI sector has progressed so significantly and at a pace over the last 20 years, that we must change in order to bring it into the more modern world and make it fit for purpose. So the new framework hopefully will focus on organisations driving their change through a cycle of reflection, planning, progressive implementation, review and learning. So not a static set of requirements that have the potential of dating quickly. The journey is based on honest self-reflection against a series of development indicators which will be provided through the course of the project or the programme. But we all know that all organisations are different. So everybody will have a different starting point and therefore a different journey through this. Now, self-reflection is really important in this because it enables a view of areas of strength to maintain and to further maximise, but it also highlights areas that can be improved upon. But the framework is not about being critical of those areas, but it provides supportive suggestions for improvement, which then leads to a continuous improvement plan. So back into that cycle for review, amendment, self-improvement, and journey. So along that journey, for some organisations, we hope there will be access to additional support, such as mentors, reflective assessors, and peer-to-peer support as well, to help us all on our journeys. The new framework will be structured around 5 main pillars or themes. These are culture, experience, relationships, communications, and leadership. And within these pillars, we highlight why these are important and why they provide an aspirational statement of what good might look like. People can work towards those pillars either singly or all together. Now, a really important note. This is designed to be used alongside a DIAP. It is specifically designed to be different and to be complementary to the DIAP process. They are specifically designed to coexist. And I won't go into too much detail about what's inside the pillars because that detail will come. But the fundamental differences are that a DIAP is primarily focused on governance and workforce within an organisation, which Trixie took us through so brilliantly, whereas this framework is now addressing inequalities in the sports sector more broadly, at a level below and across additional areas of an organisation. So more details on that will come in due course in 2023, but we are hoping to launch, and you will hear about it through your communication channels. And we are also looking to transition over those organisations who have already achieved various levels of the old original equality standard appropriately and sensitively, knowing all the work that's gone on behind the scenes and dependent on an organisation's individual situation. So, final slide from me. I spoke about Sport England's commitment to EDI, and I spoke about the review of the equality standard for sport. And then I said that I would speak specifically about a programme that we, Sport England, have been delivering with a partner, and some key takeaways for us all to consider, and the things to think about when embedding EDI into organisational culture. So, as part of our commitments around uniting the movement in 2021, Sport England created Leading for Renewal, and we enlisted inclusive employers to support with the delivery of that programme. Some of you in the room may know of it already, some of you may have been beneficiaries of the programme. Leading for Renewal is one of the ways that Sport England are aiming to realise its vision, to make more equal, more united, more connected communities. Our insight tells us there's an empathy gap that often exists between those making decisions and those most affected by them. This isn't because decision makers don't care. It's because they often don't have the lived experience to draw upon, to make the decision, to take the right direction, to make the call. And important factors can be missed. And it's for those reasons that Sport England invested in Leading for Renewal through inclusive employers to deliver the programme. And it was an innovative, non-monetary support package, and it was aimed at professionals within our partner organisations. Like I said, some of you may have already gone through the programme. What was fascinating was to hear the links back to Mike Higgins' session before lunch, and also to the people session just now from our colleagues. There's definitely some crossovers in all of the work and a lot of similar language, which is reassuring because you'd hope that way. Inclusive employers, through the program, designed 3 separate tiers of activity, and the tiers had been developed to suit different roles within an organisation. So the first one was inclusive leadership, specifically for the execs. The second one was inclusion enablers, which was designed for those working in senior management teams. And then the third one was inclusion influencers, which was available to the whole workforce. of those participating organisations. And having come to the end of the current programme, inclusive employers are keen to communicate through me some key learnings about the programme for all organisations to consider when embedding EDI. And this information, these takeaways, this insight was heard over and over again from the people they worked with as to what was important for them. So we'll fly through. The first is to consider the application of inclusion and diversity knowledge to specific areas of work in order to move from a programmatic to an embedded approach to inclusion. It's exactly the same as Trixie was saying in terms of the operations across UK sport and how I've said in Sport England. It's everybody's responsibility as opposed to falling on one or two people's shoulders. The second point is around developing inclusive strategies and programs using an inclusion by design approach. Essentially, this means inclusion from the outset, not as an afterthought. Let's not do inclusion as an add-on. Let's not try and shoehorn inclusive operational activity as a secondary element to a program. The third point is provide an ongoing program of learning and development to continue to raise confidence and competence in areas such as anti-racism, disability inclusion, and transgender inclusion. But also things like language, doing courses around unconscious bias and inclusive recruitment. And that speaks to Trixie's point previously about making sure that everybody is confident in speaking about this subject matter. The next one is around workforce diversity. So we need to make sure that we develop strategies to diversify the workforce. And we've heard this already from our colleagues talking about the people plans. We know all of this. This is all crucial information to when we think about embedding EDI within our organisations. And this needs to straddle everywhere, from volunteers, officials, coaches, board members, through to core operational staff. The next one is a really interesting one to me, and it was quite surprising, but I completely understand. We need to start to think about safe and neutral spaces to enable chief execs, CEOs, COOs to continue their learning. It can be lonely at the top, and sometimes if there aren't those peer-to-peer support groups where people can freely speak and share in a safe space, then there is no development or engagement for that individual at the top. Safe and neutral spaces to enable chief execs to continue their learning. The next one is around engaging and consulting with clubs. We know all this. We need to make sure that we do that with clubs, with members, with stakeholders, but it has to be meaningful. And I think somebody mentioned before lunch, we can consult with our members as much as we like, but are we asking the right questions to get the right information? Then the penultimate one is around exploring the talent pathway. So high performance systems and elite sports, to identify and address systems and structures that act as barriers to inclusion. So it speaks to Trixie's point and all the work that UK Sport are doing. And then finally, in all of the insight that we've learnt through Leading for Renewal, is continued opportunities to come together and to learn from each other in communities of practice. We hear that latter point over and over again, not just through Leading for Renewal, but in all of our work. It's coming out really strongly through the system partner piece at the moment, and it was already spoken about a little bit this morning. We need to get people together as much as we can, because sharing that best practice, and particularly in EDI, is where the education and the learning happens. So, some great info there from inclusive employers and from Leading for Renewal. Very aware that we've only scratched the surface in terms of EDI. We, Trixie and I, could probably stand up here all day and talk to you about embedding EDI and how to do that in the best way and what we've learnt. But from what we've delivered to you today, what I've heard for the rest of the day as well, it's really reassuring to hear that none of it is rocket science. All of it is achievable, and all about what we've spoken today links to each other. So UK Sport, Sport England, DIAPS, Equality Standard, Leading for Renewal, plus all of the other sessions as well. We also, thinking back to Kristen's point, this is our chance to be bold. This is our chance to be courageous. This is our chance to set our stall out about EDI and embedding that within our organisations. And done well, we'll really start to make a real and tangible progress around embedding EDI into organisational culture. So that's it for me. I don't know how long we've got for questions.
About minus 10, 11 minutes. So I know we're hard up against a, is this mic on? We're hard up against a break, but so I'm going to apologise, but say I'm not going to take any questions from the room. Maybe if you can grab Lindsay and Trixie over coffee if you do have a question. But I do have two that I think can be dealt with quite quickly that have come in via the online app. The first one should be relatively straightforward. Will the support packages for EDI be available to unfunded NGBs?
The sports package in terms of the equality standard review, is that all the information you've got?
That's all I've got, just support packages.
Is that what you think?
The DIAP would be. So the DIAP support package that we rolled out is for our Tier 3 funded partners who need to create a DIAP, so that would be exclusively for them. But as Lindsay mentioned, within the new framework, we're hoping to put some mentoring support and other support forward for funded partners, but the framework itself will be out there in the public and is a standalone tool. They will be able to access that. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so some of it definitely.
And just to add to that, sorry Trixie, we're hoping to develop a centralised portal as well where some individuals and organisations will be able to download resources that will support them to take them through the pillars that are detailed within the new framework as well. So should be open to all.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And finally, and then we will go to a break, one around data. So most or all of the data on EDI is self-reported by individuals. Do you have any advice to organisations that may find it difficult to encourage their people to self-declare, particularly when organisations are small and individuals may believe they could be identifiable?
We've had this in UK Sport. Sorry, Lindsay. Yeah. And it also is indicative of culture, because if your colleagues are not declaring, is that a trust thing? Do they not trust you? Do they not trust what you're going to do with the data, how you're going to hold it? So there is a really important communications piece around collecting data, so setting out exactly what data you need and why, but then importantly making use of it. So in UK Sport, we established our baselines and we set our recruitment targets on those baselines. We've shared that with staff so they can see the importance. But it is something we've increased our declaration rates up now to over 80%, but it's taken us over 18 months to do that. So it is a continuous, this is why the data is important. You can't debate the data. It tells you what you look like, warts and all, no matter what it says. You might not like what it says. That's the important starting point.
Absolutely, and I think we've dealt with this through some of our EDI colleagues as well, have asked us a similar question, and the response back was to speak to the staff and colleagues within the organisation to articulate exactly why that data is so important, but also to promote the organisation and the psychological safety of disclosing that information and the support mechanisms that are in place in the organisation, such as employment and employee networks based on protected characteristics or other avenues that you can detail in your people plan or in your DIAP.